top of the page, Hava Nashira, come let us sing. Let's lift our voices in song. Hava, Hava Nashira, Shir Hallelujah, Shir Hallelujah. 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 Hava, Hava Nashira, Shir Hallelujah, Shir Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Welcome and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
If you are joining us online, Shabbat Shalom, and I invite you to send in your Shabbat wishes in the chat box. And we have those from Howard and Sylvia Cohn in Boca Raton, and Anthony and Pat Williams in Naples, Florida. I'm not jealous at all. Every Shabbat is special, but this is a very special Shabbat. This Shabbat is known as Shabbat Shira, when we celebrate our ancestors' passage through the Red Sea. Miriam would lead them in song and dance. And so, this is often a Shabbat of special music. How appropriate then that tonight we also mark what has become something of a Jewish observance, MLK Shabbat. We acknowledge our common bonds of people who have suffered through slavery and the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. An essential part of so many civil rights rallies, protests, and marches were spirituals and songs of freedom. Tonight, we will sing some of those songs. Our annual observance of MLK Shabbat is largely the work of our member Dave Buckman, and it is my pleasure to invite him to share a few words with us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I look so forward to our Dr. King Shabbat service every year. MLK was easily the inspirational leader who impacted my life the most. I have found his courage, determination, persistence, patience, and faith, along with his passionate and emotional preaching ability, to be incredibly inspirational at many different times of my life. He related to and understood the many hopes and dreams of the voiceless and enunciated those hopes and dreams to others with the perfect amount of forceful grace, all the while knowing of the immense risk to himself for the greater benefit of those he represented and for humanity. King truly lived up to his words when he said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others." King was also a man, a person, a real person, like many of those we read about in the Bible, who we learn from. We learn from their actions, we learn from their beliefs, we learn from their teachings, we learn from their faults, and we learn from their dreams. And how appropriate, as Rabbi has said, that this week's portion of Torah, we read of a dream. As the Israelites crossed the Sea of Reeds towards freedom, the dream to let my people go had finally come true. This story often has me thinking of Dr. King's life, of Dr. King's dream. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed when I was just shy of 8 years old. A few years later, I learned about him and the struggle he and his fellow Black Americans had just trying to obtain the rights that most Americans already possessed. And of course, I learned about his dream, but did I really understand it? As a little white kid in Massachusetts, not even knowing any blacks, could I even comprehend this dream? Did I grasp that something I had already possessed was to Dr. King just a dream? When a bit older, as a good Jewish boy in religious school, learning about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, King's dream really began to resonate with me. Reverend King spoke about things that surely made sense to me. Later, learning in temple about tikkun olam, repair of the world, I thought it was only just that MLK's dream should be a reality, especially here in America, right? After all, weren't his words true that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? A decade later, my awareness became way more than words and books. As an 18-year-old college freshman, I found myself in Brooklyn, just blocks from Bedford-Stuyvesant, Bed-Stuy, known then as America's largest ghetto. Pretty much all black, pretty much all poor. It was there that I really began to understand King's dream, that I really began to understand injustice. My eyes were open to a world that I previously only knew existed in black and white. Black and white words on paper pages, and black and white images via TV airwaves. Black and white. In this world now new to me, I fell asleep at night to the colorful noises I had only heard in movies. In this world new to me, I meandered through streets surrounded by sceneries I had just seen in documentaries. In this world new to me, I was made aware of an existence I had never ever sensed before. This new world to me, just outside the wrought iron fences and gates of my college, Pratt Institute's campus, made me a witness of many of the people M.L. King dreamed for. They existed here. I saw it in living color. It was part of what Dr. King spoke of. This was one of the places Martin Luther King was telling us about. These were some of the people who Reverend King's dream was for. Over half a century ago, MLK stood before and spoke to 250,000 people in person and to the whole world ever since. He shared his dream without it being written, inspired by the audience and those on stage with him. Among those on the stage speaking that day was a rabbi who served in a temple not far from here in Newark. Before King spoke of the plight of his people and his dream, he listened to the words delivered by his fellow civil rights activist and friend Rabbi Joachim Prince, who stated that a great people who had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers, referring to his experience in Berlin during Hitler's Nazi regime. And he went on to warn that America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. And then Dr. King delivered the dream heard around the world. So now it's been almost 60 years since then. And if Reverend King was here today on the day before what should be his 93rd birthday, I wonder what his dream would be now. Mere months since perhaps the greatest demonstration for civil rights since his leadership, since his life, what might he think of our country, his country? What would he think of his famous speech now, his famous dream now? Might it, maybe, perhaps, sound something like this? I was happy to join with you that day in what went down in history and might still be the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. That day I shared a dream, that dream deeply rooted in the American dream, and I still have that dream. That one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I still have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons and daughters of former slaves and the sons and daughters of former slave owners will think nothing of sitting down at the table of brotherhood. I still have that dream. A dream where one day, even in the state of Mississippi, a state still burning with the heat of injustice, still smoldering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I still have a dream. I still have a dream that my 3 remaining children and my lovely granddaughter will live one day in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I still have that dream today. I still have a dream that one day down in Alabama, still struggling with malicious racism, with its governor having her lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. I still have that dream today. I still have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed and all flesh shall see it together. This is still our hope. This is still my faith. This is still the faith that I traveled back to the South with. And with this faith, we will still be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, still knowing that we will be free one day, with equal justice one day. Yes, I still have this faith. I still have a dream that we will see true freedom with justice one day. And on that day, all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, Muslims and Buddhists, will very naturally join hands and all together sing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are all here, free at last. Last year, at this MLK Sabbath service, I spoke from here with clergy of all different faiths and races. I spoke about a little black kid, maybe 6-year-old, who, while walking by me on a street in Brooklyn, looked up at me and said, "White people give me a headache." I still hear his quiet but booming voice over 40 years later. That one minute moment returns to me and has me thinking of so many things on so many levels. Last year I said, I wonder what's up with that kid. I wondered if he was still around. I wondered if he was still alive. I sure hope so. And now, if he is, I wonder, and I really do wonder, what his dream might be. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Dave, thank you so much for those very poignant and powerful words. Tomorrow morning, Hannah Altman and Henry Weinstein will each be called to the Torah as they celebrate becoming B'nai Mitzvah. And so we invite Hannah and her parents and Henry and his parents to join us on the Bima to light the Shabbat candles. The blessings are on page 120. And if you want to bring your siblings, you can bring them along. One, two, three.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we beyond our lives give light to all who behold us, as their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel, who have kindled lights, so may we in our own day be among us who kindle light.
The candles? Use that. Pick it up from the bottom.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu le'echad likner, le'echad likner, shel Shabbat.
Thank you. Our worship continues with Lecha Dodi on page 138 of our prayer books. We'll be chanting verses 1, 2, 5, and 9.
Sounds good to me.
And at the last verse 9, we will rise and face the door and greet the Shabbat. We continue with the call to worship the Baruch Hu on page 146.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
We continue in Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv arabim, v'chokhmah poteach she'erim, uvitbunah mishaneh itim, umachalif et hazmanim, umesader et hakochavim, v'mishmerotehem barakia kirtzono, borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, uma'avir yom umedi layla, Umavdil ben yom uben laila, Adonai tzavaot shemo, El chai v'kayam, Tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Arabim. You may be seated.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We read together at the top of page 157. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together. Elie Wiesel wrote, "True, we are often too weak to stop injustices, but the least we can do is protest against them. True, we are too poor to eliminate hunger, but in feeding one child, we protest against hunger. True, we are too timid and powerless to take on all the guards of all the political prisons in the world. But in offering our solidarity to one prisoner, we denounce all the tormentors. True, we are powerless against death, but as long as we help one man, one woman, one child live 1 hour longer in safety and dignity, we affirm a human's right to live. We continue on page 160. Our worship continues with the Amidah, beginning on page 164. Please rise.
Adonai sefatai tifta, ufiai gitehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Ha'po, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, U'mevig Geula Livnei B'neihem, Eman Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Moshiach Magim, Baruch atah Adonai, Magid Avraham, HaKadosh, Kadoshim b'chol yom yahalelu chasela. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh.
We continue silently using the words on the page or the words of your heart, and when you have finished, you may be seated. Page 647 at the bottom, Oziva Zimrat Yah. Even as we celebrate the joy of Shabbat, we never forget those who are in need of healing, physical, spiritual, emotional. And so we take a moment to pray for them. Mishaberach avotenu ve'imotenu. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, bless those who are now ill. I invite you to share the names of those for whom you are praying. Feel free to put their names in the chat box. And if you are here in the sanctuary, please feel free to share the names with us now of those for whom you are praying. In addition, we hold close to our hearts Gabby Kraft Buckman, Sharon Neese, Ari Brothman, Sharon Sidney, Paula Wegg, Gary Donner, Anthony Corellis, Eliyahu Aron, Rosalie Landau, Michelle Colburn, Connor Galinas, Jeff Gecker, Hadara Pollock, Flora Pollock, Jean Outlaw, Edward Wright, Melissa Rusitano, Carolyn Wheel, John Rusitano, and Shirley Rosenberg. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Each week, we are reminded that life always holds the promise of sweetness. We thank God for the gift of Shabbat and pray that our cups will always runneth over with joy. Please turn to page 122 and rise for the Shabbat Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu
In this week's Torah portion, Bishalach, we read of our ancestors' climactic journey to freedom. With the Egyptian troops closing in on them, the Israelites, with the help of God, make their way across the Red Sea and to their first taste of freedom. We often find a bit of humor in one of their first acts as a free people. What do they appear to do? Complain. First, they complained about having no food to eat, and then no water to drink. It is easy to dismiss these complaints as the whining of an ungrateful people. But let's face it, food and water are no luxuries, but rather necessities for life. The Israelites were not complaining. They were making their voices heard. With no other means available to them, they were lifting their voices in protest. The use of the ballot box to make one's voice heard was a long way off. While there are examples of voting in the ancient world, the notion of a representative government is recent, dating back only to the beginning of the 17th century. The United States held its first presidential election in 1789, and only white, male, land-owning Protestants were allowed to vote. That limited the voting population to somewhere between 10 and 20% of the total population. Our nation's early voting history includes religion tests that barred Jews from voting in elections. It was not until 1828 when the last religion test barring Jews from voting in Maryland was abolished. And we know well the suffrage movement leading to the 19th Amendment, which codified the right of women to vote in 1919. Asian Americans also faced obstacles at the ballot box. The McCarran-Walter Act of 1952 finally lifted all restrictions on Asian immigrants becoming naturalized citizens, fully allowing all Asian Americans to become citizens and to exercise their right to vote. Theoretically, black men had the right to vote with the 15th Amendment in 1870, but we know that was not the case. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and violence kept many African American men from ever casting a ballot. This system of denying people of color the right to vote was so pervasive that it became a major demand of the civil rights movement. One of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s most important speeches, delivered in 1957, is called "Give Us the Ballot." 87 years after the right was supposedly won, King writes, "But even more, all types of conniving methods are still being used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. The denial of this sacred right is a tragic betrayal of the highest mandates of our democratic tradition. And so, our most urgent request to the President of the United States and every member of Congress is to give us the right to vote." If King were alive today, he could be giving that same speech. The Historic Voting Rights Act of 1965 relegated poll taxes and literacy tests to the dustbin of electoral history. It also expanded Asian American voting rights even further by adding protections and accommodations for voters with limited English, such as access to translators and ballots in multiple languages that we are now all familiar with. The Department of Justice would monitor voter registration efforts in counties where less than half of the African American population was registered. Counties with a history of discrimination would have voting policies reviewed by the Department of Justice before being enacted. But the last decade has seen a concerted effort to roll back voter protections. The window for applying for a mail-in ballot has been shortened in some states. 4 states have limited the number of drop-off boxes for mail-in ballots. Other states have imposed arduous voter ID requirements. polling places have been closed. And in 2 states, Florida and Georgia, snacks and bottles of water are not allowed to voters waiting in line to cast their ballot. Overall, lawmakers have introduced at least 389 restrictive bills in 48 states in the 2021 legislative sessions in just 1 year. These bills target African American voters, as well as new Americans, older voters, and voters with disabilities. That is why the passage of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act would have been so important. The Freedom to Vote Act would have standardized voting election laws across the country and would have significantly expanded voting access, including reversing the effects of dozens of new state-level voting restrictions passed just this year. The John Lewis bill would have restored key provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that have been struck down or weakened by the Supreme Court and changed the way federal courts handle election cases. This legislation, always an uphill fight, now seems doomed. The cornerstone of Martin Luther King's legacy is securing the right for Black and brown people to vote. That is among the reasons why Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a federal holiday. But this year, the family of King has called for Monday to be a day without celebration. Rather, they had called on Monday to be a day when we pushed our officials to pass the Freedom to Act vote. They urged all of us to call our senators in White House to support the Freedom to Act vote, the Freedom to Vote Act, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. While this legislation we now know will not come to be this time, we know that such fights are hard, and we must be in it for the long haul. Voter suppression is not a thing of the past until we all do our part. Our Jewish tradition teaches us that the election of leaders is a collective responsibility. Rabbi Yitzhak taught that a ruler is not to be appointed unless the community is first consulted. The freedom to vote is fundamental. As Americans, we cherish democracy, and we know that our democracy is made stronger when all Americans have equal access to the ballot box. In his 1957 speech, Dr. King amazingly referenced this week's Torah portion, Bishalach, when he concluded with these words: "Sometimes it gets hard, but it is always difficult to get out of Egypt. For the Red Sea always stands before you with discouraging dimensions. And even after you've crossed the Red Sea, you have to move through a wilderness with prodigious hilltops of evil and gigantic mountains of opposition. But I say to you this afternoon, keep moving. Let nothing slow you up. Move on with dignity and honor and respectability." It is as if Dr. King predicted this week's turn of events. Dr. King knew that crossing the Red Sea would just be the beginning. He knew that it would not be easy and that others would stand in the way. We best honor King's legacy and best acknowledge Monday, the federal day in his honor, by dedicating ourselves to this unfinished fight. As Dr. King preached, it will not be easy and it will not be quick. But the promise of democracy is not real until each and every one of us has our vote counted. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May that be God's will. We continue with a link on page 586. Please rise.
Alleluia,
may be seated. Sadly, Rabbi Israel Dresner died yesterday at the age of 92. The name may be familiar to some as a local rabbi. For over a decade, he served as rabbi of Temple Shaarei Shalom in Springfield. Rabbi Dresner's reputation spread beyond New Jersey, however. He was dubbed the most arrested rabbi in America.
Wow.
What was he arrested for? Rabbi Dresner was perhaps the most ardent rabbi involved in the civil rights movement. A friend of Dr. King, they first met in 1962 when Dresner visited Dr. King in Albany, Georgia, in a jail cell. Dresner himself had first been arrested during the Freedom Rides of 1961. Fittingly, Rabbi Dresner was honored at the White House on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. You are invited to rise and to remain standing when the name of your loved ones is recited. And if there is someone who you are remembering, please feel free to share their name in the chat box. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, and we recall loved ones who have died in the last month. Elizabeth Enright, aunt of Lisa Urbano, Susan Werner, grandmother of Matt Mendelson, Sam Sklar, brother-in-law of Barbara Crown, Shirley Fradkin, grandmother of Morgan Sertner, Stephen I. Silberfein, father of Jason Silberfein, Donald Milrod, father of Louis Milrod, and Gerald Feigenbaum. And we recall those who have died but not yet buried, Simon Kaplan, and those who have died at this season in years past. Yetta Baukner, Fred Becker, Eva Berman, Samuel Bedell, Lena Bierman, Ellen Bogan, Frank Boydman, Jack Cash, Muriel Donner, Albert Feldman, Molly Feinberg, Sylvia Gersh, Brana Goldapper, Norman Eli Goldberg, Harold Goldman, Marcella Goldstein, Louis Goldstein, Kitty Goodman, Rose Goodman, Donald Hirsch, Ronna Lee Hollander, Melvin Katz, Lillian Kay, Ruth Feldman Keller, Stephen Klein, Myrna Cohen, Bessie Korse, Benjamin Kuhn, Leon S. Lackman, Arthur Lawrence, Naomi Letterman, Seymour Lemberg, Anne Frances Levitt, Tanis Lickalter, David Maskett, Adele Middleberg, Blanche Mironov, Norton Morgenthau, Freda Nathanson, Pauline Karp Pizanika, Gustav Reich, Herbert Rothschild, Ruth Rudofsky, Shirley Scheinfeld, Rudolph Schumann, Sybil Shupak, Sophie Schuster, George Shebitz, Sarah Faye Silverstein, Robin Fisher Solis, Murray Spivak, Selma Staton, Beatrice Steinman, Murray Salzman, Louis Tabbs, Bruce Tallis, Louis Tischler, Louis Warren, Chava Weingarten, George Wendler, Sidney Williams, Ruth Wolf, Sidney Siegel, Irving Meistrick, as well as all those we have drawn into our hearts with our own. Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. We continue with the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Please rise. Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabbah, v'alma divrach yurtei, v'yamlech malchutei, b'chayekum uvyomechom, uvchaye tuchol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'mei u'maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal, Shemei Ketusha Berechu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, ta'amiran bi'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Lama Rabba min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all Israel, and to which we say, Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. Our observance of Shabbat continues tomorrow with Holy Scrollers at 8:15 and the Minyan at 9:30 and Connie Ryder's Torah study at 10. Mazel tov to Hannah Altman and Henry Weinstein, who will be called to the Torah tomorrow morning. Join us Monday at 5 o'clock for a fun Tu B'Shvat Seder on Zoom as we commemorate the New Year of Trees and learn about climate justice. Bible class meets on Tuesday, and our Intro to Judaism class begins on Sunday, 23rd. Did you forget what you learned in Hebrew school? Did your child come home from religious school with a question you could not answer? Then this class might be for you. And save the date, March 31st, when we welcome Pulitzer Prize-winning and best-selling author Isabel Wilkerson, author of Caste, for a virtual conversation. We bring our worship to close tonight with We Shall Overcome, which is on your handout. Please join in.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. In the Hebrew together. Anu nitkaber, anu nitkaber, anu nitkaber bevoyo. Ani ma'amim be'emuna shlema nitkaber bevohayo. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, everybody.